Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It is a busy week around here as we get ready for perhaps the release of the NFL schedule, maybe next week, maybe the week after. Of course, the NFL draft coming up at the end of the month. I am Cup crazy with my Stanley Cup fever as the Caps get their playoff run going next week. And, of course, we'll have Preakness and Derby coming up here and full racing coverage, of course, out at WNST.net. But it is baseball season. It is week one. We all looked at the schedule and saw that this is going to be a tough April for the Orioles, and certainly they struggled hitting and pitching over the weekend. Now off to face the world champion Houston Astros, where they are really just getting comfortable with themselves. I was in Orlando last week for the NFL owners meetings, and I saw the general, John McClain from the Houston Chronicle there, who's one of the big Astros fans, and he's still sort of pinching himself, as is my next guest, Rich Lord, who is an afternoon show host at Sports Radio 610 in Houston, where he's already sent me a few texts saying I have to introduce him as the home of the world champion Houston Astros, because, you know, I like to get everybody a victory lap here, Rich. So I know how much it meant to those of you down there who've been, talking about the Astros for 10 or 20 or 30 years in many cases, that there was a parade. It was real, and this is a pretty good baseball team you got coming back this year, too.
It's great to be with you, man. And yes, this actually happened, although it's pretty hard to believe.
Yeah, I guess in the aftermath of all of that, complacency certainly has not been the issue. And I guess the Orioles and everyone else finds that when the Astros are the team that was the best team last year, that did get better in the offseason. I don't think there's any argument about that, right?
No, there really isn't. I mean, if you look at the arc of last season, they had a bunch of injuries they had to deal with in their starting rotation. They did a lot of plugging of holes with guys like Mike Fiers and Brad Peacock and Charlie Morton. But those guys, although they're not the headliners, are really a big part of why they got to where they did eventually last season. So, and if anyone recalls their postseason, we know that they called on a bunch of starters to come out of the bullpen because their bullpen was not in great shape. As a matter of fact, Ken Giles, who was a finalist for that Mariano Rivera Award, at some point became, non-functional. I mean, they could not use him in the postseason. He was so bad, and that was the guy who saved 34 games. So there was a lot of patchwork going on with regard to the pitching staff, and that seems to have been addressed. Joe Smith, Hector Rondon have been added to the bullpen, and of course Garrett Cole from the Pirates has been added to what was already a really strong rotation. And knock on wood, at this point, they're all healthy.
You know, you sat around last year and the year before talking about winning a championship with what was there. I mean, McCullers and Keuchel, okay, fine, and we're going to fill in the rest and what. Boy, it's a whole different thing now beginning April 1 where you're talking about Verlander and Cole being a part of this thing. This is different than it looked a year ago. And at the All-Star break last year, you thought you had enough, right? You thought we can win with what we have, right?
Yes, they were still competitive, and they still absolutely look like one of the better teams in baseball. So it really is a case of the rich getting richer with the Verlander deal and the Cole signing. And now they know how to win. Now they've been through the experience. They know what it takes. And, I mean, the perfect example is the guy going tonight against the O's, Charlie Morton. I mean, his 2016 is almost completely wiped out by injury. The Astros take a flyer on him and give him a 2-year deal, $7 million each year. And, he turns out being the winning pitcher in Game 7 of the ALCS and Game 7 of the World Series. So, like I said, kind of an embarrassment of riches. And to say the least, it's not something we're used to here in Houston, Texas. I've been here since the early 80s, and there have been far more heartache than celebration. I mean, we had the 2 Rockets championships in the 90s, and that is it. And it's been a long time since those championships. But we're sitting around now. We've got the defending World Series champions. The Rockets, especially with the way the Warriors have been struggling lately, look like they could legitimately win the NBA championship. And I'm not going to predict the Texans go to the Super Bowl, but if Deshaun Watson is healthy, this is the first franchise quarterback this city has had since Warren Moon about 35 years ago.
It really is a strange time there because much like our city, your city was fractured. Look, you know me, I was an old Owler fan, and I love the Love You Blues and the Pastorinis and Earl Campbell and Bum and all of that stuff. And I love those Warren Moon teams, the Jack Pardee era and all that stuff. And I would say this, though. You had a team leave. You had to go get another team. Behind it all, you always had the basketball team there and Akeem and, all of the Rudy T and all that stuff that went on during that period of time. But, we're kind of similar in that way and waiting around. But Baltimore had this rich baseball heritage that Houston was always on the outside looking in. For anybody who was an old Astrodome fan, going back to Jim Wynn, going through all of J.R. Richard, Nolan Ryan, and Jose Cruz, and then even through the modern era, Bagwell and Biggio, what happened almost a decade and a half ago now, and losing a World Series, but getting there at least. Having a parade there, it feels like it's a transcendent thing, but stranger than that is that the way the architectural layout of how the Astros were put together now becomes this sort of battle cry for 15 teams in baseball who don't have a lot of money to say, we're going to build it the way the Astros did. And it's not as easy as they made it look.
No, it's not, and you're absolutely right on that. And let's be clear, as far as Houston, Texas is concerned, if you want to talk about the sports DNA of this city, it will always begin with football. Even if the Astros win 10 World Series championships, football will be the sport that we're able to talk about year-round with the fans of this city and the sport that they're most passionate about. But if you go back to 2005, Astros make their first World Series. They get swept by the White Sox. That felt like we were about to sort of become what I would call a legitimate baseball city, a true baseball city. Unfortunately, what immediately followed after that World Series appearance was the owner at the time, Drayton McClain Jr., effectively stripping down the entire operation, and I mean from top to bottom through the minor league rungs, to facilitate a sale. I mean, he was refusing to pay signing bonuses. Anyone who made any kind of money was sent elsewhere. And we saw what the product was. They lose over 100 games 3 times in 4 seasons, and they're kind of a laughing stock. And we're thinking 6-7 years ago, what happened to that franchise and city that was about to break through to the upper echelon of baseball, and it kind of all went away. But then Jim Crane bought the team, got his $35 million discount to agree to go to the American League, brought in Jeff Luhnow, who is as much of a sabermetrics analytics guy as you'll find in the sport, A.J. Hinch, who had some experience in San Diego, and next thing you know, they're drafting more smartly than they ever have in their franchise history, and they're doing things financially that make sense, and they're building through that farm system, and the Altuves, and the Springers and the Correas and people like that coming up through the organization. It really has been a true renaissance for the sport in this city.
Well, I mean, I go back to, who was their natural rival. I don't know that they ever really had one that wasn't the Phillies for 10 minutes in a playoff series 100 years ago, or the Dodgers or something like that in a big series. The Rangers thing has really grown, right? And I think outside of Texas, no one would feel it or know it, and how weird that is for 50 years. But I would say around here, if the Ravens started playing the Redskins every year, you'd see something. If the Ravens started playing the Eagles every year, you'd really see something. The likes of what we see with the Capitals and the Flyers and, other sort of rivals that we have with the Steelers. But the Rangers and the Astros, the sport of baseball, existed in Texas for over half a century without any of that. The moving to the American League, as weird as it still is at the Astros in the American League for me, I'm sure it's weird for you. Still weird for me that the Brewers are in the National League because I go back that far. And again, that was a Bud Selig move made for convenience back in the day when he was making himself commissioner. But this has been great for the Astros, been great for baseball, been great for Texas, great for everybody, I guess, except for the Rangers, because the Astros have had the upper hand here recently. But the Rangers beat the Astros around in the early part of that thing, right?
Oh, they did, and mercilessly. It was totally one-sided when the Astros first entered the American League. It started to turn around last year. As far as rivalries are concerned, honestly, in the baseball history of this city, The only true rivalry the Astros ever had, you got to go back to the old National League West, which went away in the early to mid-'90s, but it was the Dodgers. It was that whole Lasorda thing, Tommy Lasagna. I mean, they had a true hatred of the Dodgers, and the Dodgers weren't too crazy about the Astros, and it was a good rivalry. Then you go to the NL Central, and you get a little something developing with the St. Louis Cardinals, but for the most part, they were the dominant team, and I don't know if St. Louis and Houston will ever have a real natural rivalry between the two cities.
Yeah,
but
they already had the Cubs, right? So
right, exactly. That's their rival and always will be. But now you've got the American League West and the Rangers, as you said, in the same division, and it's become more of a true rivalry. Now, for something to be labeled, a true rivalry, it's got to be. I think it's got to involve both teams. It can't be one team dominating the other. And when the Rangers were dominating the Astros, it didn't feel like much of a rivalry. Well, the worm has turned, and the Astros are dominating the Rangers, and they are more competitive in these games against the Rangers. And I'll tell you something else, Nestor, that was thrown into the mix last August when we got hit with that knockout punch called Hurricane Harvey. The Astros requested at the time, because they couldn't get back to Houston because, it was just impossible with the conditions here. The Astros asked the Rangers to do them a favor and swap home series. So they would play 3 up there and 3 down here and just trade series dates. The Rangers refused. And you talk about people angry in this city. The Rangers refused to do that, citing some BS reason about protecting their ticket holders. And bottom line is the series got moved to Tampa, a neutral site where the Astros and Rangers played. It was a bad weekend for the Astros. They obviously prevailed and went on to the World Series, but nobody in this town has forgotten John Daniels' refusal to accommodate them at a time when a natural disaster had crippled this city. That's not going away anytime soon.
He is Rich Lord. He lords over all things sports radio from 2 until 6 in the afternoon in Houston, Texas. He's on Sports Radio 610. You can find them out at sportsradio610.com. I'm out on their website right now where you can listen in, and you can also find him at Rich Lord SR 610 out on Twitter. How many years now in Houston, Rich, for you?
Well, occasionally that comes up on the air, and we like to say somewhere between 20 and 99.
Okay, yeah.
But the truth is 37, believe it or not.
37. Wow. This is 27 for me. So you're always going to be 10 ahead of me. But for this team and the way it's been structured and put together, it really does feel like that last year wasn't a one crack at it. And I was there in 2015 when I did my 30 ballpark and 30-day tour, and I was there on a really cool night when Keuchel pitched against the Yankees, and sort of the Astros Magic sort of came to life that night. They beat up on the Yankees, kind of went on a tear, got into the wild card situation, or into the playoffs there, and ran into the Royals. The following year, the fall apart that happened 2 years ago this month was really a little bit of a lesson for a bunch of the young guys in the organization, many of them who struggled through it, who later on won a championship 6 months ago. It feels like this is a time where for the next 2, 3, 4 years, this organization's going to have a chance to win 90-plus games the way it's constructed right now.
I think you're right. The core of this team is still so young. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And moving forward, the key question then becomes, how much of the core can they keep together when they start getting into their arbitration years and free agency and, start commanding much bigger salaries than they're commanding right now. The next domino to fall will be the Dallas Keuchel deal. He is a free agent after this season. Won the Cy Young a few years ago, but the last 2 seasons have been largely injury-plagued, although he's also sprinkled in some real dominant stretches as well. I think that most people expect he will not be here in 2019, that they'll move on, and it's certainly a luxury to have people like Verlander and Cole in the rotation to absorb that loss. I think it would be an upset if they retained Keuchel. But a few weeks ago, they did hand Jose Altuve, who, this guy's like 27 years old and has already won 3 batting titles and an MVP. They did hand him the deal that he deserves, quite frankly. It's a total year, I think it's 7 years, about $163 million. So they ponied up for Altuve. Next up are players like Correa and Bregman at third, and they kind of ponied up for Springer, 2 years, $24 million. So I think that's the question. And Jim Crane, so far, the owner, has answered it to the satisfaction of most Astros fans. Will he pay what it takes to keep this team together? And so far, it's looking pretty good.
Rich, you mentioned that this will be the last year maybe for Keuchel and maybe hitting the market. I don't know. I mean, in this offseason where the Orioles just signed Alex Cobb a week and a half ago, gave him $53 million in real money over 4 years, the market's so weird in the offseason for all of this. We've got Duquette, Showalter, Adam Jones, Manny Machado, and Brad Brock, and Zach Britton, 6 major components, including, Machado, Showalter and Duquette, who run the organization. This is a fascinating sort of cobble it all together year for the Orioles. In our division, we've got the Yankees and the Red Sox. You're always hitting your head on something. The Astros don't have that going on in their division right now. I mean, it feels like Texas wants to take a run now and again, and I know the Angels have loaded up, and, the circles will come to town every time that kid pitches, and he pitched pretty well on Sunday, I know, in Ohtani. But it feels like a whole different thing when the Red Sox and the Yankees are in your way as opposed to where the Astros have to do it out in the West.
There's no doubt. They're the heavyweight in the American League West. There's really nobody close to them. Certainly the Mariners and the A's are not close to them. And I would say you're right. The Angels might be the only team capable of also getting to the postseason out of this division, but I kind of doubt it. I think the Astros are kind of in a class by themselves, and the organizational depth on this team, I mean, you go down into the farm system, and that's another reason why I think Keuchel is likely to not be here in 2019. And let's let 2018 play out. If he's completely healthy and has a season akin to the one where he won the Cy Young back in 2015, that might change the calculus on this. But like I said, the last 2 seasons he's had extended periods of time where he's not been healthy, and I think that factors into it. But they got a kid, Nestor, named Kyle Tucker, 21-year-old outfielder, who couldn't make this roster, who makes, I think, the roster of almost any other team in baseball at this point. They don't need him. They've got enough. And plus, if he's 21 and you don't bring him up, that delays the start of the service time clock. And
well, we went through that here with Wieters. Yeah. We went through that here with Machado, quite frankly.
Right, exactly.
Any guy that's special, that's where you are, right? Literally, that's baseball.
Exactly, but that's the luxury they have. They're so deep on the big league level and organizationally that they can afford to take their time with some of these guys and not have the product on the big league level suffer. And again, Nestor, I go back to the opening of our conversation. I can't believe this is the Astros we're talking about right now.
Rich Lord, he is still pinching himself over all things World Championship Houston Astros. He's the afternoon show host down there at Sports Radio 610 in Houston, Texas. And, on the other side of this, you got this basketball situation where I think if you would have gone into a time warp after the Super Bowl and gone away the last 6 weeks and come back and looked up and said, what in the world has happened to the NBA? What in the world happened to the Golden State Warriors? And where are the Rockets? And you got a whole different thing going on in Texas down there where San Antonio got a little bite in them on Sunday night in a year where clearly the Rockets have sort of run away, and they are the next thing up there after the rings get handed out here against the Orioles, right?
It is unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, like I said, kind of pinching ourselves. The Rockets, I think it would be an upset if they don't win the NBA championship. I don't see anyone in the East capable of challenging them if they make it to the finals. And I only see the Warriors in the West as a team that could challenge them and prevent them from getting to the NBA finals. And like you said, it's the regular season, so you take it with a grain of salt. And I think there is an element of the Warriors taking the cautious approach heading into the playoffs and sitting a lot of their guys and making sure they're healthy. Look, if they're healthy from top to bottom in the playoffs, they're going to be a tough out as always. But the fact that Steph Curry, they're predicting, is going to miss the entire first round. Look, it was a couple of years ago when they were beaten by the Cavaliers in the finals that Curry injured a knee actually slipping on a wet portion of the floor at Toyota Center here in Houston in a playoff game. So, I guess it remains to be seen how close he can get to 100% if he recovers. And I think without Steph Curry at 100%, I don't like their chances. So, yeah, the Rockets, the thing they've done is they've the last few years under D'Antoni, who's known as a guy whose teams score a lot of points but don't defend that well, is they've picked up players like P.J. Tucker and Luke Baumute. They had Trevor Ariza here already. Harden has stepped up his game. Chris Paul, one of the greatest defensive guards in the history of the sport. It's absolutely amazing how much they've improved on the defensive end, and that's why they are where they are.
He is Rich Lord. You can find him out on Twitter, Rich Lord SR610, as well as at Sports Radio 610. The Orioles down in Houston, and they're giving out rings and, letting banners fly this week. Good times down there, right? I mean, this is the end of that run and all the fun that was had. And, I'm sure for you and for neighbors and people around you and your community and your audience all these years, I hope you guys did have a good time with it. We may never get to experience that baseball-wise here again, but we've had two pretty good football parades here, Rich.
Yes. Well, listen, if I've learned anything, it's never say never. And you guys have had that historically, obviously, in Baltimore, and certainly doesn't mean it won't happen again. But, I think as sports cities go, Houston had it coming, I guess is the best way to put it. Houston has paid its dues as far as the good times we're enjoying right now, and we're knocking on wood every time we say that.
Well, get out there to Westheimer, get some good food, get on over to the original Nymphas there, pick up some nachos for me. We'll get down to Houston to visit with you soon. Great having you on, Rich.
Thank you, Nestor. Always a pleasure.
You got it. Rich Lord, SR610 is the way to find him out on Twitter and at Sports Radio 610. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at King Discount Liquors, Lottery, beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. I am 3 Malbec bottles short and probably 2 6-packs of stout and maybe some sort of peanut butter chocolate concoction out there at King Discount Liquors. Get on out to Rosedale. Give the King a ring. It's time that I bother him about doing a World Cup a commercial or something. We'll have some fun. Box Hill Pizzeria, the best crab cakes in Norfolk County, can now be shipped anywhere in the world. Get out to boxhillpizzeria.com. If you're up in Abingdon, you'll see that they are remodeling their beautiful dine-in. They're moving it out onto the porchway there up in Abingdon. So stop by and see Tommy and Chris and the crew at Box Hill. They'll have their place completely ready to go in a few weeks. They keep telling me, few weeks. At least I got the dressing that makes me so happy here at the house. And stop by, get some crab cakes to go as well. It's that time of the year. It's crab cake season. Fremont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need Fremont's education online. And my pal Carl Delmont, of course, sponsoring our big swabbing with head coach Barry Trotz from the Washington Capitals last Thursday night out at Michael's Cafe in Timonium. We had a great night out there. It was all brought to you by Fremont Mortgage as well as our friends at Cole Roofing. And Billy Cole's going to be here a little later on in the week as well to get us ready for the weekend. We got the NFL schedule coming out. The draft's up in about 3 weeks now. We got the Maryland Jockey Club entries on the front page of WNST.net as well as in our morning newspaper, brought to you by Planet Fitness at planetfitness.com. And, of course, Pink, Black-Eyed Susan, and the Preakness Stakes all coming your way. We're now, 7 weeks out on Preakness, 4 weeks out on Derby? Look out, Justify. That's what they keep telling me. All my insiders say, watch Justify for the Derby. So I keep giving that tip out. I hope it works. It's Bafford's horse. It's always more fun when Bafford comes to Baltimore, I think. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. You can find anything you miss up in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. They're 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. Download, podcast, listen when you want, where you want, how you want. It is the buyatoyota.com audio vault. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570. And WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.